fight it, but we tried to give them ways that they could do it right if they wanted to. Right, I say that kind of rhetorically. But the point is that they shot down even those. They refused to consider anything from us on this. And one of the people who was really instrumental in helping push some of these, I guess, additions or helpful things to it, such as the felony mark on your driver's license. Who knows that? Yeah? All right. Was Senator Kim Thatcher. So I'll introduce Senator Kim Thatcher from the Oregon State Senate.
How many of you think criminals obey laws? Got a bridge to sell you over the Columbia. I appreciate all the written testimony that the legislators received, and for many of you who are here today, they were heartfelt, deeply held convictions communicated to the legislators, and you made people in that building behind us, me anyway, pay attention. They stood up and they were worried, and you know what? The proponents of the bill decided they would create their own grassroots. They created a steady stream of concocted phone calls to legislators. An anti-gun group orchestrated grassroots, unquote, air quotes, as Denise Quinn Nanke would say, by somehow finding people who would supposedly like expanded background checks and dropping the caller into the legislator's office, one after another after another. And they're to tell us that they support background checks, as if we now have no background checks. Obviously, they don't know even what we have. So one after another, these calls would come in, and you could hear a person in the background monitoring the calls. And sometimes you would hear something like, "Do not let that one through." Well, there were occasions where that monitor wasn't successful censoring a call. One woman called and said this: "I was connected to your office by the people wanting background checks for guns. I have to say I disagree with that bill. I think it's going to make it cumbersome for private people to do, to sell stuff. I just wanted to let you know my opinion." I was able to get that because that was left on my voicemail. And to the letters lawmakers received, for every 75 letters or so we received from cogent original thought, you would actually put some thought into the letters you would write, there was one plug-and-play letter from the supporters of the bill. And they would always be parroting the same tired statistics of all the tragedy that would be prevented if only we had this law in place. And I want to highlight some of the things that came from you. And then I will highlight a letter I received from a proponent, only because he was one of the rare ones who attempted to have an original cogent thought. He was wrong, but at least he tried to communicate something with reason. All right, so first, here are highlights from your letters. Punishes and prohibits responsible citizens. Zero impact on reducing crime. Enforcement would depend on a gun registry. Gun registries always lead to confiscation. Confiscation doesn't happen at first until one day, shazam, it does. Confiscation leads to tyranny. And here is something that I would hear that the proponents would say, it doesn't say anything about owning guns in the Bible. Well, though owning a gun is not in the Bible specifically, the right to arm oneself in defense of life, liberty, and property is in the Bible. This law will create confusion and expense. And the Pew poll that says nearly 6 out of 10, for the first time in a couple decades, nearly 6 out of 10 Americans believe gun ownership does more to protect people than it does to endanger personal safety. It will waste law enforcement resources. It forces payment of a government fee to exercise a constitutional right. It creates criminals out of law-abiding people. It creates numerous, cited time after time, all these numerous impossible and impractical situations people could be placed in, which would endanger lives. The background check system is already flawed and overburdened and fraught with mistakes and delays. It creates resentment and division among the people. It's about control of the citizenry. It's an exchange of freedom for some perceived security. And that's just a sampling of all the themes that we received in these letters. Now, here are a few short excerpts from your letters. Bob Jensen from the Coast said, "Why, if background checks will make us safer, do we have the exemption for relatives? Are relatives any more trustworthy? Or is the reasoning that if this bill should become law, that the writers will return and amend it?" Stay tuned, I guess. M. Baker said, and this is great, "I would like to suggest a bill to make it illegal for politicians to be under the influence of any antidepressants or other mood-altering substances. Anyone undergoing treatment for mental health issues also should not legally be allowed to participate in making laws of any kind, and especially ones taking away the rights of law-abiding citizens." Good job, M. Baker. Dale Casey from Medford said, "This is an example of a very bad bill, and if enacted would be even worse than the foolish people who are pushing and voting for it. They are telling us, commoners, that we are not responsible enough to judge for ourselves of the character of people." Then he adds this, I love this. "That may be very true for those who voted for anyone in the legislature who would vote for such a terrible and controlling bill." Love it. Now, the highlights from people who supported 941, it all revolved around some statistics. They all had them about in the same area. How many fewer police were shot, supposedly? How many fewer women shot by intimate partners? You've heard the tired line that they spill. And it would all keep guns out of the hands of the wrong people and save lives. So, on those points, I want to add an excerpt from a letter from a proponent. He said, "I am writing in support of expanded background checks for gun ownership. I support our Constitution and the Second Amendment. However, the truth is that for every constitutional amendment, there are caveats. There are restrictions to free speech. You can't libel or yell fire in a crowded theater. Restrictions to voting. Prisoners don't have that right. Restrictions to freedom of the press, libel and slander, etc. Our individual freedoms aren't limitless. It's our government's role." Oh, this kills me. "It's our government's role and responsibility to protect all citizens, and one person's individual freedoms will eventually compromise another's." End quote. Huh? First of all, I think we can all agree that we shouldn't unjustifiably hurt people or take their stuff, right? The limits on constitutional rights this person cited are that your rights end when you infringe on the rights of others. No, you cannot take other people's stuff through libel, slander. You steal a person's reputation. Prisoners, well, gee, they're in prison. Some of their rights are temporarily suspended. They can't vote either. Making it so that law-abiding citizens are treated like criminals is not a justifiable limit to a constitutional right. The person cites examples of people that took actions that are wrong in the process of exercising their right. The examples he cites show a disconnect between rights and responsibilities. 941 says we are all wrong unless we take government-mandated action. That's a bit upside down to me. So yes, though there are limits to free speech. You can't incite riots. You can't yell fire in a crowded theater unless, of course, there is actually a fire. And you can't steal the reputation of another and hurt their good name by lying about them. We are told that 941 is about keeping guns out of the hands of the wrong people and saving lives. But could you imagine having to go through a background check to write or speak something to someone? After all, words in the mouths of the wrong people could kill. Think of the cyber bullies out there who hound some people to the brink of suicide. Think of the riots that have been incited, ending up killing innocent people. Should we be forced to show up at a federally licensed speech permission giver for a background check to pay a fee every time we wish to exercise the right of free speech? How about voting? There are limits to that right also. You have to be a citizen, duh. You have to be at least 18, not in prison. You have to be alive and an actual human person. And you're only supposed to do it once during an election. So I submit to you that voting for the wrong people can also cause loss of life. Look what happens in Detroit, Baltimore. I am sure there are 1,000 other examples you could think of where the wrong people in power cause loss of life. But the point is, could you imagine having to pay a government fee in order to exercise your right to vote? That actually used to be a thing. It was called a poll tax. It was intended to keep some of the wrong people from voting, and it's unconstitutional. Yet we are daily being told that in order to trade a gun, you have to pay money and get a background check every time, even if you just bought one hours before or the day before. Really? Even if you'd already gone through a background check, which legally allows you to carry a concealed handgun. On top of that, we are being told that in order to keep the guns out of the hands of the wrong people, we need to make it more and more difficult and expensive to get them into the hands of the right people. So the question is, who are the right people? Who are the right people to speak and write? Anyone, as long as they don't purposely steal another's reputation through slander, libel, or incite riots. Who are the right people to vote? Any citizen of our country of a certain age and not in prison. Who are the right people to bear arms? Anyone, as long as they are not justifiably hurting another, unjustifiably hurting another, or taking their things. Should a person be allowed to run a background check on an individual before they transfer a gun? I think so. That's why I had an amendment that would put the responsibility on the seller to do a background check when they deem it necessary to ensure a prohibited person isn't getting a gun. I had another that would mark a driver's license on an ID card with a mark that indicated the person was prohibited from buying a gun. That way, good people wouldn't have to be proving a negative. Basically, any of our rights should be freely exercised, and we should not have to prove a negative before exercising them. I repeat, we should not have to prove a negative before exercising any of our rights. One time or another in history, the government has gone too far. It has allowed men to take away another man's freedom through slavery. It has banned the use of selling of alcohol, prohibition. It has stopped women and minorities from voting. It has unlawfully seized property, driven natives off their homeland to reservations, put American citizens of Japanese or German descent in internment camps, and a bunch of things I'm sure you can think of. But the point is, when government acts in a way that is obviously wrong to patriots, to those who love the Constitution, it is our obligation as patriots to dissent and work to change the laws and change the people who made those laws to be in harmony with the Constitution. There comes a time when all good men and women have to stand up. Thank you for standing.